Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a worn cloth, squinting at the approaching vessel through the dust clouds of Kepler Station's outer docking ring. The ship was clearly alien in design, its hull gleaming with a distinctive blue-silver alloy favored by the Zephyrian Empire. What caught his attention wasn't the ship's obvious wealth, but the way it limped into the dock, plasma conduits flickering weakly along its starboard side. Kepler Station existed on the very edge of human space, a ramshackle collection of repurposed cargo containers and salvage hull plating that serve as a waypoint for traders, smugglers, and anyone else who preferred to conduct business away from the prying eyes of central authorities. Marcus had operated his one-man repair shop here for 3 years, eking out a living fixing the mechanical problems that other shops either couldn't handle or wouldn't touch. The Zephyrian vessel settled into docking clamp 7 with a groaning protest of stressed metal. Marcus could see the problem immediately, his trained eye picking out the telltale signs of cascade failure in the ship's primary power distribution network. It was the kind of repair that would cost a fortune at any proper shipyard, assuming they'd even work on alien technology. A figure emerged from the ship's airlock, and Marcus felt his breath catch. The woman was undeniably Zephyrian, with the characteristic pale blue skin and silver hair that marked her species, but there was something different about her bearing. Most Zephyrians who passed through Kepler Station were merchants or minor diplomats, polite but distant. This one moved with a fluid grace that spoke of extensive combat training, her hand resting casually on what appeared to be a ceremonial blade. She wore simple traveling clothes, practical rather than ornate, but the fabric itself was clearly expensive. Her silver hair was pulled back in an intricate braid that Marcus recognized from his cultural studies as indicating high rank within Zephyrian society. What puzzled him was that she traveled alone, without the usual retinue of servants and guards that accompanied Zephyrian nobility. "Excuse me," she called out as she approached his shop, her accent lending a musical quality to her words. "I was told you might be able to help with ship repairs." Marcus straightened up, suddenly, conscious of the grease stains on his coveralls. "That depends on what's wrong with it. I specialize in cross-compatibility issues, but I'm just one guy working out of a converted cargo container." The woman smiled, and Marcus found himself momentarily distracted by the genuine warmth in her expression. Most aliens who sought his services treated him with barely concealed condescension, viewing humans as a useful but inferior species. "My ship has suffered a cascade failure in the primary power grid," she explained. "The backup systems are holding, but barely. I need to reach the Proxima system within the next standard week, and I'm told the nearest Zephyrian shipyard is 3 weeks away." Marcus whistled low. "Cascade failure on a Zephyrian vessel? That's serious business. Mind if I take a look?" She gestured toward the ship. "Please. I should warn you, I don't have much in the way of credits at the moment. My cargo was lost in a recent transaction." "Let me assess the damage first," Marcus replied. "We can work out payment later." As they walked toward the docking ring, Marcus found himself stealing glances at his potential customer. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the usual pattern of Zephyrian travelers. The way she unconsciously checked sight lines and exit routes, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders that suggested someone accustomed to danger. If he had to guess, he'd say she was military, possibly special forces. The ship's interior confirmed his suspicions about the woman's importance. Despite her claims of financial difficulty, the vessel was clearly built to royal standards. The corridor walls were lined with panels of genuine Altarian crystal, and the gravity generators hummed with the smooth efficiency that came only from the finest Zephyrian engineering. This wasn't the ship of some minor merchant or middle-rank diplomat. "This is a beautiful vessel," Marcus commented as she led him toward the engine compartment. "Custom-built. Family heirloom," she replied simply. "It's been in my bloodline for several generations." The engine compartment told the story of what had happened. Someone had attempted an emergency jump while the ship was still within a gravity well, probably to escape pursuit. The stress had overwhelmed the power distribution network, causing a cascade of failures that had rippled through every major system. It was the kind of damage that would require complete replacement of most of the ship's electronics at any normal repair facility. Marcus spent 20 minutes crawling through access panels and running diagnostics with his portable scanner. When he finally emerged, covered in more grease and with a grim expression, the woman was waiting patiently. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad," Marcus admitted, "but not impossible. The main problem is that your ship uses quantum-linked power distributors. When one failed, it created a resonance cascade that took out most of the network. A standard repair would require replacing the entire grid with new quantum-linked components." Her shoulders sagged slightly, and the cost of such components would be more than most people see in a lifetime, Marcus finished. "But I might have another option. See, humans have been dealing with cascade failures for decades, ever since we started jury-rigging alien technology into our own ships. We developed some workarounds that might not be pretty, but they'll get you where you need to go." The woman's eyes lit up with hope. "What kind of workarounds?" Marcus grinned. "The kind that would horrify most Zephyrian engineers. Instead of replacing your quantum-linked distributors, I can install a series of buffer capacitors that will isolate each section of the grid. It won't be as efficient as your original system, but it'll prevent another cascade failure and restore full power to all your essential systems." "And the cost?" "For the parts and labor, about 2,000 credits." The woman stared at him in shock. 2,000? "But you said the standard repair would cost hundreds of thousands, maybe more," Marcus confirmed. "But I'm not doing a standard repair. I'm doing a human repair, which means making something that shouldn't work somehow function anyway." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether he was being honest or setting up some elaborate scam. Finally, she nodded. "When can you start?" "Right now, if you want. I've got most of the components in stock, and I can fabricate the rest. Should take me about 2 days to complete the work." 2 days? Her surprise was evident. The Zephyrian engineer I consulted on Titan Station said such a repair would take at least 2 weeks. Marcus shrugged. Different approaches. Zephyrian engineering prioritizes elegance and perfection. Human engineering prioritizes making things work, period. Sometimes it means taking shortcuts that would make other species nervous. Over the next 2 days, Marcus threw himself into the repair with characteristic intensity. He'd always found a certain satisfaction in solving problems that others deemed impossible, and this particular challenge was more complex than most. The woman, who had introduced herself simply as Lyra, proved to be an attentive observer, asking intelligent questions about his methodology and even offering assistance when needed. What surprised Marcus was how naturally they worked together. Most alien customers preferred to keep their distance while repairs were underway, viewing the process as beneath their notice. Lyra, however, seemed genuinely interested in understanding how human engineering differed from her own species' approach. She even rolled up her sleeves and helped him route new power conduits through the ship's access tunnels, her smaller stature proving advantageous in the tighter spaces. "Your people have an interesting philosophy," she commented on the second day, as they worked to install the last of the buffer capacitors. "Most species would never accept such creative solutions to technical problems." Marcus paused in his work, considering her words. "I think it comes from being relative newcomers to galactic civilization. When we first made contact with other species, our technology was generations behind everyone else's. We had to learn to adapt, to find ways to make incompatible systems work together. After a while, that became our specialty. And you're not concerned about the long-term reliability of such modifications?" "Every solution is temporary," Marcus replied. "The trick is making sure your temporary solution lasts longer than you need it to." As evening approached on the second day, Marcus made the final connections and powered up the modified system. The ship's lights flickered once, then stabilized as power flowed smoothly through the jury-rig network. All the diagnostic readings showed green, and the ominous vibration that had plagued the vessel since the cascade failure finally disappeared. Lyra stood beside him in the engine compartment, watching the status displays with obvious relief. "It's working," she breathed. "It's actually working." "Of course it's working," Marcus said with a grin. "I don't do shoddy work, even when I'm cutting corners." When they returned to the main cabin, Lyra reached for what appeared to be a payment pad, then hesitated. "About the payment?" 2,000 credits, as agreed, Marcus said. "Though if you're short on cash, I'm willing to discuss alternative arrangements. I could always use rare components or technical manuals." Lyra shook her head. "It's not that I don't have the credits. It's just what you've done here, the quality of the work, the time you've invested. 2,000 credits seems inadequate." Marcus was touched by her concern, but he'd quoted a fair price for the work involved. "A deal's a deal. Besides, most of my customers are traders and freelancers who don't have huge budgets. I keep my prices reasonable because that's what works in a place like Kepler Station." "Most repair shops would have charged me at least 50,000 credits for this work," Lyra pointed out, "even assuming they could do it at all. Most repair shops are located in civilized space, where they can charge premium prices," Marcus replied. "Out here, you work with what people can afford, or you don't work at all." Lyra transferred the agreed-upon amount, but Marcus could see she was troubled by something. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Marcus, may I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why you work out here, on the edge of nowhere? With skills like yours, you could easily find employment with any major corporation or government. The pay would be vastly better, and the working conditions far more comfortable." Marcus considered the question for a moment. It wasn't the first time someone had asked, but there was something in Lyra's tone that suggested the answer mattered to her more than simple curiosity would warrant. "I suppose it's because out here, what you do matters more than who you are or where you come from," he finally said. "In civilized space, everything is about credentials and connections and following the proper procedures. Here, if you can solve problems and keep your word, that's enough." Lyra nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she'd been thinking. "And you find that satisfying? The independence, I mean." "Most days," Marcus admitted. "Though I'll confess it gets lonely sometimes. Most of the people who pass through Kepler Station are just looking for quick fixes and fair prices. Not many are interested in conversation with a grease monkey from the outer rim." Something shifted in Lyra's expression, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "I've enjoyed our conversations these past 2 days. Your perspective on engineering and on life is refreshing." Before Marcus could respond, the station's communications system crackled to life, announcing the arrival of another vessel requesting emergency docking. Lyra straightened, the moment of personal connection replaced by urgency. "I should let you get to your next customer," she said. "Thank you again, Marcus, for everything." "Safe travels," Marcus replied, though something in his chest tightened as he watched her walk away. As Lyra's ship undocked and disappeared into the star field beyond Kepler Station, Marcus found himself hoping their paths would cross again. There had been something special about working alongside her, a sense of connection that went beyond the simple business relationship he maintained with most customers. He returned to his shop, unaware that his life had just been irrevocably changed by an encounter with one of the most powerful women in the galaxy. The woman who had introduced herself as Lyra was actually Crown Princess Seraphina of the Zephyrian Empire, and she had just experienced something that would reshape her understanding of what truly mattered in a potential partner. In the weeks that followed, Marcus would continue his work on Kepler Station, fixing impossible problems for grateful customers and maintaining his reputation as the best independent repair specialist in the sector. But, unknown to him, his name was now being spoken in the highest circles of Zephyrian society, as a princess prepared to make a decision that would shock the entire galaxy. The cascade failure that had brought Lyra to his shop had been no accident. It was part of an elaborate test designed to evaluate potential suitors for the Crown Princess's hand in marriage. But, for the first time in the test's long history, the woman being courted had found herself genuinely impressed by one of her subjects. 3 weeks after Lyra's departure, Marcus was deep in the bowels of a Martian freighter's engine compartment when his communication console chimed with an incoming priority message. He ignored it initially, focused on rerouting power conduits around a burned-out fusion manifold, but the insistent beeping eventually forced him to crawl out and check the display. The message header made him blink in surprise. It was from a Zephyrian embassy on New Geneva, bearing official government seals that indicated correspondence of the highest importance. Marcus had never received anything more official than a tax notice from his home planet, let alone communication from a major galactic power. The message itself was formal and brief, requesting his presence at the embassy at his earliest convenience to discuss a matter of mutual benefit. A transportation voucher was attached, along with accommodations at one of New Geneva's finest hotels. The whole thing felt surreal, like some elaborate practical joke. Marcus spent the rest of the day finishing repairs on the freighter while pondering the strange invitation. New Geneva was the diplomatic heart of human space, home to embassies from dozens of alien species and the headquarters of the Terran Colonial Authority. It was not the sort of place where grease-stained mechanics from border stations were typically welcome. By evening, curiosity had overcome his natural suspicion. He sent a reply accepting the invitation and arranged for a colleague to cover his shop for a few days. The next morning found him aboard a commercial liner bound for the Sol system, still wondering what the Zephyrian government could possibly want with him. New Geneva was everything Marcus had expected and more. The orbital city sprawled across 3 massive platforms connected by graceful transit tubes, its gleaming towers housing representatives from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian embassy occupied an entire section of the diplomatic quarter, its crystalline spires reflecting the light of Sol in brilliant rainbow patterns. Marcus felt distinctly out of place as he approached the embassy's main entrance, his best clothes still marking him as someone from the working class rather than the diplomatic corps. The Zephyrian guards flanking the door examined his credentials with polite efficiency before escorting him through corridors lined with priceless art from across the Empire. He was led to a conference room where 3 Zephyrians waited for him. The first was clearly a diplomat, his bearing formal and his clothing indicating senior rank within the embassy hierarchy. The second appeared to be military, her uniform crisp and her posture suggesting years of combat experience. The third was an elderly male whose simple robes marked him as some sort of scholar or advisor. "Mr. Chun," the diplomat said, rising to greet him. "I'm Ambassador Valdris. Thank you for making the journey to meet with us. Please have a seat." Marcus settled into the offered chair, noting how the 3 Zephyrians studied him with obvious interest. There was something about their attention that made him feel like a specimen under examination, though their manner remained courteous. "I'm curious about why you've asked me here," Marcus said. Deciding directness was his best approach. The message mentioned a matter of mutual benefit, but I can't imagine what business the Zephyrian Empire might have with someone like me. Ambassador Valdris exchanged glances with his companions before responding. "You recently performed repair work on a Zephyrian vessel at Kepler Station. The owner of that ship has spoken highly of your skills and professionalism." "Lyra," Marcus said, surprised by the warmth that crept into his voice at the memory. "Yes, I remember her. Nice woman, interesting ship. Is there a problem with the repairs I made?" "Quite the contrary," the military officer interjected. "Our technical analysis indicates your modifications were not only functional but elegantly conceived. You managed to solve a complex engineering problem using resources and methodologies that our own specialists would not have considered." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just made do with what I had available. It's nothing any competent engineer couldn't have figured out." The elderly advisor leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. "That is precisely what makes your work remarkable, Mr. Chun. Most engineers would have declared the problem unsolvable given the available resources. You found a solution anyway. Human engineering is different," Marcus explained. "We don't have the luxury of perfect materials or unlimited time, so we learn to improvise. It's just how we work." "Indeed," Ambassador Valdris said. "And that brings us to why we've asked you here. The Zephyrian Empire is facing some unique challenges in our frontier territories. We have situations where traditional approaches to problem solving have proven insufficient. We believe someone with your particular skills might be valuable in addressing these challenges. Marcus felt a flicker of excitement despite his caution. The chance to work on genuinely challenging problems with access to proper resources was tempting, but experience had taught him to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. "What kind of challenges?" he asked. The military officer activated a holographic display showing a star map of what appeared to be the outer regions of Zephyrian space. "Several of our frontier worlds have been experiencing infrastructure failures. Traditional repair teams have been unable to maintain critical systems due to resource limitations and the unique environmental conditions in those systems. We need someone who can find creative solutions using locally available materials," the advisor added. "Someone who understands that perfect is often the enemy of functional." Marcus studied the display, his engineer's mind already working on the logistical implications. These worlds are pretty isolated. Supply lines would be stretched thin, and local resources would be limited to whatever could be mined or fabricated on-site. "Precisely," Ambassador Valders confirmed. "Are you interested in the position? The compensation would be quite generous, and you would have access to our most advanced technological databases." "What about Lyra?" Marcus asked, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. "Why be working with her?" The three Zephyrians exchanged another series of meaningful looks that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, the ambassador responded carefully. "Ms. Lyra's schedule is quite demanding, but there is always the possibility that your paths might cross again." Something in the way he said it suggested there was more to the situation than they were revealing, but Marcus found himself accepting the position anyway. The work sounded challenging and important, the pay was excellent, and there was always the chance he might see Lyra again. 2 days later, Marcus found himself aboard a Zephyrian diplomatic transport bound for the frontier world of Arcturus 7. The ship was a marvel of engineering, its quantum drive systems allowing it to traverse distances that would take human vessels weeks to cover. During the journey, he studied technical briefings on the infrastructure problems plaguing the frontier worlds. The situation was worse than the embassy staff had let on. Multiple worlds were experiencing simultaneous failures of critical systems, from atmosphere processors to water purification plants to power generation facilities. The pattern suggested either incredible bad luck or deliberate sabotage, though the latter seemed unlikely given the isolation of the affected systems. Arcturus 7 proved to be a harsh world of ice and rock. Its small human and alien population clustered around geothermal vents that provided the only natural sources of heat and energy. The atmosphere processor that kept the air breathable had been functioning erratically for months, forcing the colonists to rely on backup systems that were never designed for long-term operation. Marcus spent his first week on the planet conducting a comprehensive analysis of the failing systems. What he found was troubling. The equipment wasn't failing due to wear or environmental stress. Instead, someone had introduced subtle modifications to the control software that caused gradual degradation of performance over time. It was sabotage, but sabotage so sophisticated that it had initially appeared to be random system failures. The discovery raised uncomfortable questions about who might have access to such advanced knowledge of Zephyrian systems. Marcus reported his findings to the colonial administrator, who immediately forwarded them to higher authorities within the empire. Within hours, Marcus received new orders directing him to conduct similar analyses on 3 other frontier worlds. The pattern repeated itself on each world he visited. Sophisticated sabotage disguised as equipment failure, targeting critical infrastructure systems that kept the colonies viable. Someone was deliberately attempting to drive the Zephyrian Empire from their frontier territories, using methods that would have gone undetected for years, if not for Marcus's unique perspective. It was on the 4th world, Tau Ceti III, that Marcus finally encountered familiar faces. He was crawling through an access tunnel beneath the colony's main power plant when he heard a voice that made his heart skip a beat. "The modifications appear to be similar to what we found on the other worlds," Lyra was saying. Whoever is responsible has intimate knowledge of our engineering standards. Marcus emerged from the tunnel to find Lyra standing in the power plant's control room alongside two other Zephyrians he didn't recognize. She was dressed in what appeared to be a military uniform, her bearing more formal than he remembered, but her smile when she saw him was genuine and warm. "Marcus," she said, moving toward him, "I heard you'd accepted a position with the Empire. How are you finding frontier life?" "Educational," Marcus replied, acutely aware of how grimy he must appear after hours spent crawling through machinery. "Though I'm starting to think someone invited me out here, specifically because they suspected sabotage." One of Lyra's companions, a stern-faced woman with the bearing of senior military officer, stepped forward. "Your analysis of the sabotage methodology has been invaluable, Mr. Chun. We've been tracking these incidents for over a year without understanding their true nature. Any idea who might be responsible?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be classified well above his security clearance. Lyra and the military officer exchanged glances before Lyra responded. "We have suspicions, but nothing concrete yet. The sophistication of the attacks suggests involvement from someone with access to our most sensitive technical information." Marcus nodded, understanding that he was being told as much as they were willing to share. "What do you need from me?" "We need you to develop countermeasures," the military officer said. "Something that can protect our frontier infrastructure from this type of attack without requiring complete system overhauls." And Lyra added, "We need someone we can trust absolutely. Someone who has no connection to imperial politics or factional interests." The work proved to be the most challenging of Marcus's career. He spent weeks developing detection algorithms that could identify the subtle modifications being made to critical systems, then created countermeasures that could neutralize the sabotage without disrupting normal operations. It was delicate work that required understanding both Zephyrian engineering principles and the psychology of whoever was conducting the attacks. Throughout this period, Lyra remained on Tau Ceti 3, ostensibly overseeing the security investigation, but spending much of her time working alongside Marcus. Their collaboration felt natural and comfortable, each of them bringing different perspectives to complex problems. Marcus found himself looking forward to their conversations, which ranged from technical discussions to philosophical debates about the nature of civilization and progress. One evening, as they worked late in the colony's communication center trying to trace the source of the sabotage signals, Lyra asked him a question that seemed to come out of nowhere. "Marcus, what do you think makes a good leader?" He looked up from the diagnostic console he'd been studying. "That's a pretty broad question. Good leader of what? A government? A people? An empire?" Marcus considered the question seriously, sensing that his answer mattered to her for reasons he couldn't understand. "I suppose it would be someone who puts the welfare of their people above their own interests. Someone who's willing to make hard decisions when necessary, but doesn't lose sight of the human cost of those decisions." "And what about personal qualities? What kind of person should they be?" "Honest," Marcus said without hesitation. "Intelligent, obviously, but also capable of admitting when they're wrong. Someone who surrounds themselves with people who will tell them the truth, even when it's unpleasant." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, staring at the readouts on her own console. "Do you think such a person could be happy with someone beneath their social station? Someone who might not understand the complexities of political leadership?" Marcus felt a strange flutter in his chest at the personal nature of the question. "I think if someone is truly a good leader, they'd value honesty and competence over social status. The best leaders I've met were usually pretty down-to-earth people who just happened to be good at what they did." When he looked up again, Lyra was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. There was something vulnerable in her eyes, as if his answer had touched on something deeply important to her. "Marcus," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you about who I really am." Before she could continue, alarms began blaring throughout the colony. The communication center's displays lit up with warnings indicating that multiple critical systems were under attack simultaneously. This wasn't the gradual sabotage they'd been investigating. This was an immediate, coordinated assault on the colony's infrastructure. Marcus and Lyra threw themselves into damage control mode, working frantically to maintain life support and power generation as wave after wave of attacks hit their systems. It quickly became clear that their unknown enemy had decided to abandon subtlety in favor of direct action, probably because they'd realized their activities were being investigated. For 6 hours, Marcus fought the most complex technical battle of his life, using every trick he'd learned over years of emergency repairs to keep the colony's systems functional. Lyra proved to be an invaluable partner, her deep understanding of Zephyrian technology complementing his improvisational skills perfectly. When the attacks finally stopped, the colony had survived, but just barely. Half their systems were running on jury-rigged repairs and backup power, and it would take weeks to fully restore normal operations. More importantly, they'd managed to trace the source of the attacks to a ship lurking just outside the system's sensor perimeter. As dawn broke over Tau Ceti 3, Marcus and Lyra stood on the colony's observation deck, watching the first transport ships arrive with repair crews and additional security personnel. The immediate crisis was over, but Marcus could see the tension in Lyra's shoulders that suggested larger concerns. "You said you had something to tell me," he reminded her gently. Lyra turned to face him, and he could see she was struggling with something difficult. "Yes," she said finally, "but perhaps not here, not now. There are things about this situation that are more complicated than they appear." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, a new ship appeared in the sky above them. Unlike the utilitarian transport vessels that had been arriving all morning, this one was clearly a warship, its sleek hull bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. As it settled into the colony's landing field, Marcus could see the royal crest marking it as a vessel of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. "I think," Lyra said quietly, "that conversation will have to wait a little longer." The Imperial warship's arrival transformed the quiet frontier colony into a hive of military activity. Marcus watched from his temporary quarters as Zephyrian soldiers in ceremonial armor established a perimeter around the landing field, their movements precise and professional. Whatever was happening, it involved someone important enough to warrant a full Imperial security detail. Marcus hadn't seen Lyra since the warship's arrival 12 hours earlier. She'd been summoned aboard immediately after it landed, leaving him with instructions to continue working on the sabotage countermeasures. He'd spent the morning reviewing diagnostic data from the previous night's attack, but his concentration kept drifting to questions about Lyra's true identity and role in these events. A soft chime from his room's communication system interrupted his thoughts. The display showed an incoming call with Imperial security encryption, marked as Priority Level Alpha. Marcus had never received anything above Priority Level Delta. "Mr. Chun." The voice belonged to the stern military officer he'd met on Tau Ceti 3. "Please report to Conference Room 7 aboard the ISV Determination immediately. A security escort is waiting outside your quarters." Marcus found 2 Zephyrian soldiers in full dress uniform standing in the corridor. They were polite, but clearly not interested in conversation as they escorted him through the colony's main thoroughfare to the landing field. The warship loomed overhead like a metallic mountain, its hull decorated with intricate carvings that told the story of the Zephyrian Empire's greatest victories. Conference Room 7 was larger than Marcus had expected, with a curved wall of transparent aluminum that provided a panoramic view of the colony below. The room contained a dozen Zephyrians in various uniforms and civilian dress, their conversations falling silent as Marcus entered. He recognized the military officer from Tau Ceti 3, but the others were strangers who studied him with obvious curiosity. At the head of the conference table sat an elderly Zephyrian whose simple robes couldn't disguise the unmistakable bearing of absolute authority. His silver hair was braided in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated royal bloodline, and the ceremonial dagger at his side bore gems that probably cost more than most starships. "Mr. Chun," the elderly Zephyrian said, rising to greet him. "I am Emperor Alexian." Thank you for your service to our frontier colonies. Marcus felt his knees go weak. The Emperor of the Zephyrian Empire, ruler of hundreds of worlds and billions of subjects, was personally thanking a grease monkey from Kepler Station. The surreal nature of the situation made him wonder if he was dreaming. Your Majesty, Marcus managed, attempting what he hoped was an appropriate bow. I'm honored to meet you. Emperor Alexian gestured for him to take a seat at the conference table. The honor is mine. Your work in uncovering and countering the sabotage campaign has been invaluable. You've saved countless lives and prevented what could have been a humanitarian disaster across our frontier territories. I was just doing my job, Marcus replied, still struggling to process the situation. Though I have to admit, I'm confused about why this requires the personal attention of the Emperor. Because, a familiar voice said from behind him, the sabotage campaign was orchestrated by someone very close to the Imperial family. Marcus turned to see Lyra entering the conference room, but she looked different from the woman he'd been working alongside. Her traveling clothes had been replaced by an elaborate gown of midnight blue fabric that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Her silver hair was arranged in the complex style he recognized as indicating the highest levels of Zephyrian nobility. Most striking of all was the circlet of crystalline metal that rested on her brow, its central gem pulsing with soft blue radiance. Marcus, Emperor Alexian said gently, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Crown Princess Seraphina. The room seemed to spin around Marcus as the pieces suddenly fell into place. Lyra wasn't just some wealthy merchant or minor diplomat. She was the heir to the Zephyrian throne, next in line to rule one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. And he'd been treating her like any other customer who needed ship repairs. Princess Seraphina, the woman he'd known as Lyra, moved to take a seat across from him at the conference table. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see uncertainty in her eyes, as if she was unsure how he would react to this revelation. The sabotage campaign, she continued, has been traced to my cousin, Prince Valdros. He's been attempting to destabilize our frontier territories as part of a larger plan to challenge my succession to the throne. Marcus struggled to focus on the political implications while his mind reeled from the personal revelation. You've been investigating your own cousin? For over a year, Emperor Alexian confirmed. Valdros has been building support among certain factions who believe the Empire should be more aggressive in its expansion policies. Undermining our ability to maintain peaceful frontier colonies serves his political agenda. But why involve me? Marcus asked. Surely you have intelligence services better equipped for this kind of investigation. Princess Seraphina leaned forward slightly. Because Valdros has supporters within our intelligence apparatus. We needed someone completely outside imperial politics, someone whose loyalty couldn't be questioned or compromised. Also, the Emperor added with what might have been amusement, we needed someone capable of solving technical problems that our own engineers couldn't handle. Your reputation for creative solutions preceded you, Mr. Chun. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled officials, finally beginning to understand the scope of what he'd become involved in. So, the job offer, the work on the frontier worlds, all of this was part of an intelligence operation? Not entirely, Princess Seraphina said quickly. The infrastructure problems were real, and your solutions have been genuinely valuable. It's just that we had additional motivations for bringing you into the situation. And what happens now? Marcus asked. Presumably you have enough evidence to move against Prince Valdros. Emperor Alexian nodded grimly. We do. Thanks in large part to your work, we've traced his network of supporters and identified the sources of his funding. He'll be arrested within the next few days and charged with treason against the Empire. Which brings us, Princess Seraphina said, to a more personal matter. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as she reached into a fold of her gown and withdrew a small crystalline device. She activated it with a touch, and suddenly, the conference room was filled with a holographic recording of their conversations over the past several weeks. But These weren't just any conversations. They were the personal moments when they discussed leadership, relationships, and their hopes for the future. Under Zephyrian law, the emperor explained, the heir to the throne must demonstrate their fitness for rule by successfully completing a series of tests. One of those tests involves evaluating potential marriage partners. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as understanding dawned. The cascade failure that brought Lyra to my shop was artificially induced, Princess Seraphina confirmed, her cheeks flushing with what appeared to be embarrassment. As were the other seemingly random encounters that brought various suitors into contact with me over the past 2 years. I was being tested, Marcus said flatly. Everything that happened between us was part of some elaborate royal courtship ritual. Not everything, Princess Seraphina said urgently. The conversations we had, the way we worked together, the connection I felt, none of that was part of the test. That was real. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. So you've been lying to me about who you are from the moment we met. I had to, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The test only works if the subjects believe they're interacting with someone of equal social status. If you'd known I was the crown princess, it would have changed everything about how you behaved. And what exactly was I being tested for? Emperor Alexian answered, intelligence, competence, integrity, and the ability to see past social status to judge people by their character. You scored remarkably well in all categories. Congratulations, Marcus said, unable to keep the bitterness out of his voice. I'm sure that makes for an interesting entry in your imperial records. Princess Seraphina flinched as if he'd struck her. Marcus, please understand. I never intended for this to become personal. The test was supposed to be a simple evaluation of your character and abilities. But working alongside you these past weeks has been what? Marcus interrupted. Good practice for slumming with the common folk. Has been the happiest time of my life, she finished quietly. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the ship's environmental systems. Marcus could feel the eyes of every person present on him, waiting to see how he would react to this impossible situation. Part of him wanted to walk out and never look back, to return to the simple life of fixing ships on Kepler Station. But another part, the part that had been drawn to Lyra from their first meeting, recognized the genuine emotion in her voice. What exactly are you asking of me? He said finally. Emperor Alexian leaned back in his chair. We're offering you a choice, Mr. Chun. You can return to your previous life with our gratitude and a substantial financial reward for your services. Or you can consider remaining as part of our household in whatever capacity feels appropriate. Including, Princess Seraphina added, her voice barely audible, as my consort and future ruler of the empire. Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. The woman he'd fallen for was asking him to become emperor of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. It was the kind of offer that appeared in fantasy stories, not real life. I need time to think, he said. Of course, the emperor replied. Take all the time you need. These are not decisions to be made lightly. As the meeting broke up, Princess Seraphina approached him hesitantly. Marcus, would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you. Despite his confusion and hurt, Marcus found himself nodding. They left the conference room together, walking through corridors lined with artwork that chronicled thousands of years of Zephyrian history. Princess Seraphina led him to an observation deck near the ship's bow, where they could look out at the stars beyond Tau Ceti III. I know you feel betrayed, she said without preamble, and you have every right to. I should have found a way to tell you the truth sooner. When? Marcus asked. When exactly would have been a good time to mention that you're the future ruler of the galaxy? Princess Seraphina was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember what you told me about good leadership? About leaders needing to be honest and willing to admit when they're wrong. Yes, I was wrong not to trust you with the truth sooner. I was afraid that knowing my identity would change how you saw me, how you treated me. I'd never met anyone who looked past titles and social status to see the person underneath, and I didn't want to lose that. Marcus stared out at the stars, wrestling with emotions he couldn't fully name. What was real, Lyra? Because I don't even know what to call you anymore. Serafina, she said softly. But call me Sarah. It's what my friends called me before I became the crown princess. And everything between us was real, Marcus. Every conversation, every moment we worked together, every time I found myself wishing we could just be two people figuring things out together instead of a princess and her test subject. And now, I'm asking you to take the biggest leap of faith either of us has ever attempted. I'm asking you to trust that what we found together is worth building a future on, even though that future would be more complicated than either of us ever imagined. Marcus turned to look at her, seeing past the elaborate gown and royal circlet to the woman who had crawled through maintenance tunnels beside him, who had shared her thoughts on engineering and philosophy, who had made him feel less alone than he had in years. If I stay, he said carefully, what would that look like? I'm not exactly trained for imperial politics. Sarah smiled for the first time since he'd learned her identity. Neither was I, really. I've been preparing for it my entire life, but actually doing it, that's different. I think we'd figure it out together, the same way we figured out how to stop Prince Valdros. And if I go, her smile faded, then you go with my blessing and my gratitude. I won't force this choice on you, Marcus. But I will say that I've never met anyone who I'd rather have standing beside me when I inherit the throne. Marcus found himself thinking about the past few weeks, about the way they'd worked together naturally and effectively, about the conversations that had ranged from technical discussions to dreams for the future. Despite the deception about her identity, he couldn't deny that their connection had felt genuine. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. If you weren't the crown princess, if you were just Lyra from wherever, would you want to be with me? Yes, she answered without hesitation, without question. Then, maybe, Marcus said slowly, the rest is just details we'll have to work out as we go. Sarah's face lit up with hope. Does that mean you'll consider staying? Marcus looked out at the stars again, thinking about the choice before him. He could return to Kepler Station and the simple life he'd built there, or he could take a chance on something extraordinary with a woman who had already changed his life in ways he was still discovering. I'll consider it, he said, but I have conditions. Name them. First, no more tests. If we're going to do this, it has to be based on honesty from here on out. Agreed. Second, I want to continue working with my hands. I don't care if emperors traditionally spend all their time in meetings and ceremonies. I need to build things, to solve problems, to feel useful. Sera noded igoli. The empire needs more people who understand practical solutions to complex problems. There would always be work for someone with your skills. And third, Marcus said, turning to face her fully, I want to court you properly. Not as part of some political arrangement or royal test, but as Marcus Chun asking Sarah if she'd like to see what we might build together. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I like that very much. As they stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel overhead, Marcus realized that his life had just taken a turn that would have been impossible to imagine just weeks before. But, looking at the woman beside him, the one who had trusted him with her ship, and then her heart, he thought that maybe impossible was just another word for extraordinary. The investigation into Prince Valdros would continue, and there would be countless challenges ahead as they navigated the complexities of imperial politics and their unconventional relationship. But for the first time since he'd learned the truth about her identity, Marcus felt genuinely hopeful about their future together. After all, he'd built a career out of making impossible things work. How different could building an empire be? 6 months after the revelation aboard the ISV Determination, Marcus stood on the balcony of the Imperial Palace on Zephyros Prime, watching the twin suns set over the capital city. The past half year had been a whirlwind of political intrigue, cultural education, and the strangest courtship in galactic history. Prince Valdros' arrest had sent shockwaves through Zephyrian society. The revelation that a member of the royal family had been systematically sabotaging frontier colonies to advance his political ambitions had forced a complete reevaluation of imperial succession protocols. More surprisingly, the announcement that Crown Princess Serafina intended to marry a human engineer from the Outer Rim, had divided public opinion across the empire. Marcus had spent months learning to navigate the complex world of imperial politics, attending state functions where he felt perpetually out of place despite the finest clothes the royal tailors could provide. He'd also continued his engineering work, much to the confusion of court officials who couldn't understand why the future emperor insisted on getting his hands dirty with actual machinery. The project that had consumed most of his time was a complete overhaul of the Empire's frontier infrastructure security. Working with a team of the galaxy's finest engineers, he developed new protocols and technologies that would prevent future sabotage attempts while making the colonies more self-sufficient. It was satisfying work that let him feel useful while learning to balance his technical expertise with the broader strategic thinking required of imperial leadership. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Emperor Alexian would formally announce his daughter's engagement to the assembled nobility of the Empire, making their relationship official in the eyes of Zephyrian law and custom. Marcus had been dreading the ceremony for weeks, knowing that many of the Empire's most powerful families remained opposed to the match. Having second thoughts, Sarah's voice came from behind him as she joined him on the balcony. She wore a gown of deep purple silk that marked tonight's importance, but her expression was gentle and understanding. Third and fourth thoughts, Marcus admitted, I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing, both for you and for the Empire. There are probably a dozen Zephyrian nobles who would make more suitable consorts. Sarah moved to stand beside him, taking his hand in hers. Suitable according to whom? The same nobles who supported my cousin's plans for aggressive expansion. The same court factions that prioritize tradition over effectiveness. According to anyone with common sense, Marcus replied, I'm a grease monkey from a border station, Sarah. 6 months ago, the most political thing I'd ever done was argue with a customs inspector about import duties. And in those 6 months, you've helped expose a treasonous conspiracy, revolutionized our frontier security protocols, and somehow managed to win over 3/4 of the Imperial Council despite having no formal diplomatic training, Sarah pointed out. Maybe practical experience matters more than noble bloodlines. Marcus squeezed her hand, drawing comfort from her presence, as he always did. Their relationship had deepened considerably over the past months, built on a foundation of shared work and honest communication that felt far more solid than the deception that had brought them together. The remaining quarter of the council is going to make our lives difficult, he said. Let them try. Father isn't abdicating tomorrow, and we'll have years to prove ourselves before I actually take the throne. Besides, I have complete confidence in our ability to handle whatever challenges they present. Before Marcus could respond, a soft chime indicated that it was time for them to make their appearance at the formal announcement ceremony. They walked together through corridors that still felt impossibly grand to Marcus, past guards who now snapped to attention when they saw him. The transformation from anonymous ship mechanic to future emperor still felt surreal most days. The throne room was packed with representatives from across the Zephyrian Empire. Marcus recognized many faces from the past months, some friendly, some neutral, some openly hostile to the idea of human involvement in imperial governance. As they entered, conversations died away until the massive chamber fell silent, except for the soft whisper of recycled air. Emperor Alexian stood before his throne, resplendent in ceremonial robes that had been worn by Zephyrian rulers for over 1,000 years. His expression was solemn as he began the formal announcement, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Citizens of the Empire, he began, tonight we gather to announce the engagement of my daughter, Crown Princess Seraphina, to Marcus Chun of the Terran Colonial Authority. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd, though whether of approval or disapproval was difficult to determine. Marcus felt his palms sweating despite the climate control systems. This union represents not merely a personal choice, but a symbol of the Empire's commitment to building bridges with our allied species and recognizing excellence regardless of origin, the Emperor continued. Marcus Chun has proven his worth through service to our people, and he has earned both my respect and my blessing. As the formal ceremony continued, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A cascade failure in an aging Zephyrian ship had led to the most extraordinary adventure of his life, transforming him from a solitary mechanic into someone who might actually be capable of helping rule an interstellar empire. The ceremony concluded with the traditional exchange of commitment crystals, each one containing a fragment of the Empire's most sacred stones. As Marcus accepted his crystal from Sarah, feeling its warm pulse against his palm, he realized that his transformation was now complete in the eyes of Zephyrian law. The reception that followed was a study in political complexity. Marcus found himself surrounded by nobles who alternated between congratulating him and subtly probing for weaknesses they might exploit. Sarah remained at his side throughout, smoothly handling the diplomatic aspects while he focused on the technical discussions that inevitably arose when engineers gathered. "Mr. Chun," a voice called out during a brief lull in the conversations. Marcus turned to see Admiral Corvex, one of the Empire's senior military commanders and a known supporter of Prince Valdros's faction. "Might I have a word?" They stepped aside to a quieter section of the reception hall, where the Admiral's expression grew more serious. "I want you to know that many of us had reservations about this match when it was first announced." Marcus asked, noting the past tense. "Your work on the frontier security protocols has been illuminating. We've been struggling with infrastructure vulnerabilities for years without realizing how our own assumptions were limiting our solutions. Your approach has been both effective and elegant." Marcus felt a flicker of surprise. Admiral Corvex had been openly skeptical of human involvement in Imperial affairs just months earlier. "Thank you, Admiral. I appreciate that." "Don't thank me yet," Corvex replied with a slight smile. "I'm about to make your life more complicated. The Military Council has a proposal we'd like you to consider." Over the next hour, Admiral Corvex outlined an ambitious plan to extend Marcus's infrastructure security work to the Empire's core worlds. It would involve coordinating with military engineers across dozens of systems, implementing new protocols on a scale that would affect billions of citizens. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Marcus would have found irresistible under normal circumstances. "The scope is impressive," Marcus said finally, "but the timeline seems aggressive. You're talking about implementing galaxy-wide changes in less than 2 years, which is why we need someone who understands both human adaptability and Zephyrian engineering standards," Admiral Corvex replied. "Someone who can bridge the gap between different approaches to problem-solving." Marcus glanced across the reception hall to where Sarah was engaged in animated conversation with a group of colonial administrators. She caught his eye and smiled, and he felt the familiar warmth that always accompanied her attention. "I'll need to discuss this with Princess Serafina," he said. "Any major project like this would affect both of our schedules considerably." "Of course. But, Mr. Chun, I hope you understand that this represents more than just a technical challenge. The Military Council's willingness to entrust you with this responsibility is a significant expression of confidence in your abilities." As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself drawn into increasingly complex discussions about imperial policy, trade relationships, and the technological challenges facing frontier development. To his surprise, he discovered that many of the skills he developed as an independent repair specialist translated directly to larger-scale strategic thinking. The same instincts that helped him diagnose problems in failing starships proved useful for identifying inefficiencies in imperial bureaucracy. Near midnight, as the formal reception was winding down, Sarah approached him with a mischievous expression. "Walk with me," she said. "There's something I want to show you." They left the throne room through a private exit that led to the palace's engineering sections. Marcus had spent considerable time in these areas over the past months, working with the technical staff to implement his security protocols. Tonight, though, the corridors were empty except for the soft glow of maintenance lighting. Sarah led him to a workshop he'd never seen before, one equipped with the finest diagnostic equipment and fabrication tools available. The space was clearly designed for serious engineering work, not the ceremonial functions that dominated most of the palace. "What is this?" Marcus asked, running his hand along a workbench that probably cost more than most starships. "Your wedding present," Sarah replied. "Father had it built after watching you try to work with inadequate tools for months. He said any future emperor should have proper facilities for his chosen profession." Marcus stared around the workshop in amazement. Every piece of equipment was state-of-the-art, arranged in a configuration that suggested someone had carefully studied his working preferences. There was even a corner set up for the kind of improvised repairs that had made his reputation on Kepler Station. "This is incredible," he breathed. "But, Sarah, you don't need expensive tools to do good work," she finished for him. "I know, but you deserve them anyway, and the Empire will benefit from letting you work at your full potential." Marcus turned to face her, feeling overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness behind the gift. "I love you," he said simply. "Not the princess, not the future empress, but you. The woman who crawled through maintenance tunnels with me and argued about power distribution protocols. I love you too," she replied, moving into his arms. The man who saw problems that everyone else missed, who treated a stranded traveler with kindness regardless of her supposed social status. As they stood together in the workshop that would become his sanctuary within the palace, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this point. A simple repair job had transformed into political intrigue, romance, and ultimately a partnership that might help shape the future of galactic civilization. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Sarah asked. "The wedding ceremony, the official responsibilities, all of it." Marcus considered the question seriously. The past months had taught him that being part of the imperial family meant constant scrutiny, complex political maneuvering, and responsibilities that extended far beyond anything he'd previously imagined. But they'd also taught him that he and Sarah worked well together, that their different perspectives and skills complemented each other in ways that made both of them more effective. "I'm ready," he said finally, "though I reserve the right to panic occasionally when the situation warrants it." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing pleasantly in the workshop's acoustic space. "Panic permitted, as long as you don't let it stop you from building things." 6 weeks later, Marcus Chun stood in the same throne room where their engagement had been announced, wearing ceremonial robes that marked him as the officially recognized consort to the crown princess of the Zephyrian Empire. The wedding ceremony had been a spectacle that drew representatives from across the galaxy, broadcast live to billions of beings who wanted to witness the historic union. But the moment that mattered most to Marcus came afterward, when he and Sarah stood alone on the palace balcony once again, watching the stars that contained the empire they would someday rule together. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing the question that had become something of a private joke between them. "Just one," Marcus replied. "I never did get to finish that cascade failure analysis I was working on when your ship first showed up at Kepler Station." Sarah smiled, reaching into a fold of her wedding gown to produce a familiar datapad. "Actually, I brought the technical specifications with me. Thought you might want to complete the work sometime." Marcus accepted the pad, scrolling through pages of diagnostic data that seemed almost quaint compared to the galaxy-spanning challenges he now faced. But the methodical problem-solving approach that had served him well as a ship mechanic would serve him equally well as Emperor, helping him find practical solutions to complex challenges. "Thank you," he said, meaning far more than just the datapad. "Thank you," she replied, "for taking a chance on an impossible situation." As they stood together under the stars of Zephyros Prime, Marcus realized that his new life was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead that would test everything he'd learned about leadership, diplomacy, and the delicate balance between tradition and innovation. But facing those challenges alongside someone he loved and respected felt like the most natural thing in the galaxy. After all, he'd spent his entire career making impossible things work, building a marriage, and an empire with a remarkable woman beside him was just the next logical step in that process. In the years that followed, historians would mark the wedding of Princess Seraphina and Marcus Chun as a turning point in galactic relations, the moment when the Zephyrian Empire truly began to embrace the collaborative spirit that would define the next age of civilization. But for Marcus, the real victory was much simpler. He'd found someone who understood that the best solutions often came from the most unexpected places, and that love was just another complex system that worked better when two people were willing to trust each other completely. The cascade failure that had brought them together had been artificially induced as part of an elaborate test, but the cascade of changes that followed would reshape the galaxy in ways that no test could have predicted. Sometimes the most important repairs were the ones that fixed things you didn't even know were broken.